This book is a book from 1968 that they taught us in school, and it's about what to do if there's a nuclear attack, and sort of like a self-help first aid book. Anyway, it's put out by the Department of Defense and Civil Defense.
Why you and your family and almost all other Americans are left unprotected. Unknown to most Americans, our government lacks the defense capabilities that would enable the United States to stop being dependent on a uniquely American strategic policy called Mutual Assured Destruction, MAD. MAD maintains that if both the United States and Russia do not or cannot adequately protect their people and essential industries, then neither will attack the other. An influential minority of Americans still believe that protecting our citizens and our vital industries would accelerate the arms race and increase the risk of war. No wonder that President Reagan's advocacy of the Strategic Defense Initiative, derisively called Star Wars, is subjected to impassioned opposition by those who believe that peace is threatened even by research to develop new weapons designed to destroy weapons launched against us or our allies. No wonder that even a proposed small increase in funding for civil defense to save lives if deterrence fails arouses stronger opposition from MAD supporters than do most much larger expenditures for weapons to kill people. Russian, Swiss, and American civil defense. No nation other than the United States has advocated or adopted a strategy that purposely leaves its citizens unprotected hostages to its enemies. The rulers of the Soviet Union never have adopted a MAD strategy and continue to prepare the Russians to fight, survive, and win all types of wars. Almost all Russians have compulsory instruction to teach them about the effects of nuclear and other mass destruction weapons, and what they can do to improve their chances of surviving. Comprehensive preparations have been made for the crisis evacuation of urban Russians to rural areas, where they and rural Russians would make high protection factor expedient fallout shelters. Blast shelters to protect millions have been built in the cities and near factories where essential workers would continue production during a crisis. Wheat reserves and other foods for war survivors have been stored outside target areas. About 100,000 civil defense troops are maintained for control, rescue, and post-attack recovery duties. The annual per capita cost of Russian civil defense preparations, if made at costs equivalent to those in the United States, is variously estimated to be between $8 and $20. Switzerland has the best civil defense system, one that already includes blast shelters for over 85% of all its citizens. Swiss investment in this most effective kind of war risk insurance has continued steadily for decades. According to Dr. Fritz Sager, the vice director of Switzerland's civil defense, in 1984 the cost was the equivalent of $12.60 per capita. Many thousands of tons of earth from the crater of a large explosion are pulverized into trillions of particles. These particles are contaminated by radioactive atoms produced by the nuclear explosion. Thousands of tons of the particles are carried up into a mushroom-shaped cloud, miles above the Earth. These radioactive particles then fall out of the mushroom cloud, or out of the dispersing cloud of particles blown by the winds, thus becoming fallout. Each contaminated particle continuously gives off invisible radiation, much like a tiny X-ray machine while in the mushroom cloud, while descending, and after having fallen to Earth. The descending radioactive particles are carried by the winds like the sand and dust particles of a miles-thick sandstorm cloud, except that they usually are blown at lower speeds, and in many areas the particles are so far apart that no cloud is seen. The largest, heaviest fallout particles reach the ground first, in locations close to the explosion. Many smaller particles are carried by the winds for tens to thousands of miles before falling to Earth. At any one place where fallout from a single explosion is being deposited on the ground in concentrations high enough to require the use of shelters, deposition will be completed within a few hours. The smallest fallout particles, those tiny enough to be inhaled into a person's lungs, are invisible to the naked eye. These tiny particles would fall so slowly from the 4-mile or greater heights to which they would be injected by currently deployed Soviet warheads that most would remain airborne for weeks to years before reaching the ground. By that time their extremely wide dispersal and radioactive decay would make them much less dangerous. Only where such tiny particles are promptly brought to Earth by rainouts or snowouts in scattered hot spots, and later dried and blown about by the winds, would these invisible particles constitute a long-term and relatively minor post-attack danger. The air in properly designed fallout shelters, even those without air filters, is free of radioactive particles and safe to breathe except in a few rare environments, as will be explained later. Fortunately for all living things, the danger from fallout radiation lessens with time. The radioactive decay, as this lessening is called, is rapid at first, then gets slower and slower. The dose rate, the amount of radiation received per hour, decreases accordingly. Figure 1.2 illustrates the rapidity of the decay of radiation from fallout during the first 2 days after the nuclear explosion that produced it. R stands for Röntgen, a measurement unit often used to measure exposure to gamma rays and X-rays. Fallout meters called dosimeters measure the dose received by recording the number of R. Fallout meters called survey meters, or dose rate meters, measure the dose rate by recording the number of R being received per hour at the time of measurement. Notice that it takes about 7 times as long for the dose rate to decay from 1000 roentgens per hour, 1000 R/HR, to 10 R/HR, 48 hours, as to decay from 1000 R/HR to 100 R/HR, 7 hours. Only in high fallout areas would the dose rate 1 hour after the explosion be as high as 1000 roentgens per hour. Fig 1.2. Decay of the dose rate of radiation from fallout, from the time of the explosion, not from the time of fallout deposition. ORNL.DWG 78 to 265. If the dose rate 1 hour after an explosion is 1000 R/HR, it would take about 2 weeks for the dose rate to be reduced to 1 R/HR solely as a result of radioactive decay. Weathering effects will reduce the dose rate further. For example, rain can wash fallout particles from plants and houses to lower positions on or closer to the ground. Surrounding objects would reduce the radiation dose from these low-lying particles. Figure 1.2 also illustrates the fact that at a typical location where a given amount of fallout from an explosion is deposited later than 1 hour after the explosion, the highest dose rate and the total dose received at that location are less than at a location where the same amount of fallout is deposited 1 hour after the explosion. The longer fallout particles have been airborne before reaching the ground, the less dangerous is their radiation. Within 2 weeks after an attack, the occupants of most shelters could safely stop using them, or could work outside the shelters for an increasing number of hours each day. Exceptions would be in areas of extremely heavy fallout such as might occur downwind from important targets attacked with many weapons, especially missile sites and very large cities. To know when to come out safely, occupants either would need a reliable fallout meter to measure the changing radiation dangers, or must receive information based on measurements made nearby with a reliable instrument. The radiation dose that will kill a person varies considerably with different people. A dose of 450 R resulting from exposure of the whole body to fallout radiation is often said to be the dose that will kill about half the persons receiving it. Although most studies indicate that it would take somewhat less. 1. Note, a number written after a statement refers the reader to a source listed in the selected references that follow Appendix D. Almost all persons confined to expedient shelters after a nuclear attack would be under stress and without clean surroundings or antibiotics to fight infections. Many also would lack adequate water and food. Under these unprecedented conditions, perhaps half the persons who received a whole body dose of 350 R within a few days would die. 2. Fortunately, the human body can repair most radiation damage if the daily radiation doses are not too large. As will be explained in Appendix B, a person who is healthy and has not been exposed in the past 2 weeks to a total radiation dose of more than 100 R can receive a dose of 6 R each day for at least 2 months without being incapacitated. Only a very small fraction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki citizens who survived radiation doses, some of which were nearly fatal, have suffered serious delayed effects. The reader should realize that to do essential work after a massive nuclear attack, many survivors must be willing to receive much larger radiation doses than are normally permissible. Otherwise, too many workers would stay inside shelter too much of the time, and work that would be vital to national recovery could not be done. For example, if the great majority of truckers were so fearful of receiving even non-incapacitating radiation doses that they would refuse to transport food, additional millions would die from starvation alone. Degree myth: fallout radiation penetrates everything, there is no escaping its deadly effects. Degree facts: some gamma radiation from fallout will penetrate the shielding materials of even an excellent shelter and reach its occupants. However, the radiation dose that the occupants of an excellent shelter would receive while inside the shelter can be reduced to a dose smaller than the average American receives during his lifetime from X-rays and other radiation exposures normal in America today. The design features of such a shelter include the use of a sufficient thickness of earth or other heavy shielding material. Gamma rays are like X-rays, but more penetrating. Figure 1.3 shows how rapidly gamma rays are reduced in number, but not in their ability to penetrate, by layers of packed earth. Each of the layers shown is one having thickness of packed earth about 3.6 inches, 9 centimeters. 0.3a having thickness is the thickness of a material which reduces by half the dose of radiation that passes through it. The actual paths of gamma rays passing through shielding materials are much more complicated, due to scattering, etc., than are the straight line paths shown in Fig 1.3. But when averaged out, the effectiveness of a having thickness of any material is approximately as shown. The denser a substance, the better it serves for shielding material. Thus, a having thickness of concrete is only about 2.4 inches, 6.1 centimeters. Book page 14. Fig 1.3. Illustration of shielding against fallout radiation. Note the increasingly large improvements in the attenuation, reduction, factors that are attained as each additional halving thickness of packed earth is added. ORNLDWG 78 to 18834. Degree myth: a heavy nuclear attack would set practically everything on fire, causing firestorms in cities that would exhaust the oxygen in the air. All shelter occupants would be killed by the intense heat. Degree facts: on a clear day, thermal pulses, heat radiation that travels at the speed of light, from an air burst can set fire to easily ignitable materials, such as window curtains, upholstery, dry newspaper, and dry grass, over about as large an area as is damaged by the blast. It can cause second-degree skin burns to exposed people who are as far as 10 miles from a 1 megaton, 1 mt, explosion. See Fig 1.4. A 1 mt nuclear explosion is one that produces the same amount of energy as does 1 million tons of TNT. If the weather is very clear and dry, the area of fire danger could be considerably larger. On a cloudy or smoggy day, however, particles in the air would absorb and scatter much of the heat radiation, and the area endangered by heat radiation from the fireball would be less than the area of severe blast damage. Book page 15. Fig 1.4. An air burst. The fireball does not touch the ground. No crater. An air burst product. An air burst produces only extremely small radioactive particles, so small that they are airborne for days to years unless brought to Earth by rain or snow. Wet deposition of fallout from both surface and air bursts can result in hot spots at, close to, or far from ground zero. However, such hot spots from air bursts are much less dangerous than the fallout produced by the surface or near-surface bursting of the same weapons. The main dangers from an air burst are the blast effects, the thermal pulses of intense light and heat radiation, and the very penetrating initial nuclear radiation from the fireball. ORNL.DWG 78.6267. Firestorms could occur only when the concentration of combustible structures is very high, as in the very dense centers of a few old American cities. At rural and suburban building densities, most people in earth-covered fallout shelters would not have their lives endangered by fires. Degree myth: in the worst-hit parts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki where all buildings were demolished, everyone was killed by blast, radiation, or fire. Degree facts: in Nagasaki, some people survived uninjured who were far inside tunnel shelters built for conventional air raids and located as close as 1/3 mile from ground zero, the point directly below the explosion. This was true even though these long, large shelters lacked blast doors and were deep inside the zone within which all buildings were destroyed. People far inside long, large, open shelters are better protected than are those inside small, open shelters. Fig 1.5. Undamaged earth-covered family shelter in Nagasaki. Many earth-covered family shelters were essentially undamaged in areas where blast and fire destroyed all buildings. Figure 1.5 shows a typical earth-covered, backyard family shelter with a crude wooden frame. This shelter was essentially undamaged, although less than 100 yards from ground zero at Nagasaki. Point 4. The calculated maximum overpressure, pressure above the normal air pressure, was about 65 pounds per square inch, 65 psi. Persons inside so small a shelter without a blast door would have been killed by blast pressure at this distance from the explosion. However, in a recent blast test 5, an earth-covered, expedient small pole shelter equipped with blast doors was undamaged at 53 psi. The pressure rise inside was slight, not even enough to have damaged occupants' eardrums. If poles are available, field tests have indicated that many families can build such shelters in a few days. The great life-saving potential of blast protective shelters has been proven in war and confirmed by blast tests and calculations. For example, the area in which the air bursting of a 1 megaton weapon would wreck a 50 psi shelter with blast doors in about 2.7 square miles. Within this roughly circular area, practically all them occupants of wrecked shelters would be killed by blast, carbon monoxide from fires, or radiation. The same blast effects would kill most people who were using basements affording 5 psi protection, over an area of about 58 square miles. 6. Degree myth. Because some modern H-bombs are over 1,000 times as powerful as the A-bomb that destroyed most of Hiroshima, these H-bombs are 1,000 times as deadly and destructive. Degree facts. A nuclear weapon 1,000 times as powerful as the one that blasted Hiroshima, if exploded under comparable conditions, produces equally serious blast damage to wood frame houses over an area up to about 130 times as large, not 1,000 times as large. Book page 16. For example, air bursting a 20 kiloton weapon at the optimum height to destroy most buildings will destroy or severely damage houses out to about 1.42 miles from ground. 0.6 The circular area of at least severe blast damage will be about 6.33 square miles. The explosion of a 20 kiloton weapon releases the same amount of energy as 20,000 tons of TNT. 1,020 kiloton weapons, thus air burst, well separated to avoid overlap of their blast areas, would destroy or severely damage houses over areas totaling approximately 6,330 square miles. In contrast, similar air bursting of 120 megaton weapon, equivalent in explosive power to 20 million tons of TNT, would destroy or severely damage the great majority of houses out to a distance of 16 miles from ground. 0.6 The area of destruction would be about 800 square miles, not 6,330 square miles. Today few if any of Russia's huge intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, are armed with a 20 megaton warhead. Now a huge Russian ICBM, the SS-18, typically carries 10 warheads, each having a yield of 500 kilotons, each programmed to hit a separate target. See Jane's Weapon Systems, 1987-88. Degree myth. A Russian nuclear attack on the United States would completely destroy all American cities. Degree facts. As long as Soviet leaders are rational, they will continue to give first priority to knocking out our weapons and other military assets that can damage Russia and kill Russians. To explode enough nuclear weapons of any size to completely destroy American cities would be an irrational waste of warheads. The Soviets can make much better use of most of the warheads that would be required to completely destroy American cities. The majority of those warheads probably already are targeted to knock out our retaliatory missiles by being surface burst or near surface burst on their hardened silos, located far from most cities and densely populated areas. Unfortunately, many militarily significant targets, including naval vessels in port and port facilities, bombers and fighters on the ground, air base and airport facilities that can be used by bombers, army installations. 1. The main hazards of a nuclear attack are blast, heat, fire, and fallout radiation. 2. You may be able to protect yourself against blast and heat by getting inside a shelter or taking cover, before the nuclear explosions occur. You may be able to avoid fire injuries by putting out small fires or escaping from large fires that might occur in your area. 3. You can protect yourself against fallout radiation by getting inside a fallout shelter if possible, before fallout particles begin drifting down, and by staying there until you are told to come out by authorities who have the equipment to measure radiation levels. 4. After a nuclear attack, food and water would be available to most people, and it would be usable. If any fallout particles have collected, they could be removed before the food is eaten or the water is drunk. People suffering from extreme hunger or thirst should not be denied food or water, even if the available supplies are not known to be free of fallout particles or other radioactive substances. 5. Infants and small children should be fed canned or powdered milk, if available, for a while after the attack, unless the regular milk supply is uncontaminated. They should not be given water that may contain radioactive substances, if other water known to be pure is available. 6. A person cannot catch radiation sickness from another person. When a nuclear bomb or missile explodes, the main effects produced are intense light, flash, heat, blast, and radiation. How strong these effects are depends on the size and type of the weapon, how far away the explosion is, the weather conditions, sunny or rainy, windy or still, the terrain, whether the ground is flat or hilly, and the height of the explosion, high in the air, or near the ground. All nuclear explosions cause light, heat, and blast, which occur immediately. In addition, explosions that are on or close to the ground would create large quantities of dangerous radioactive fallout particles, most of which would fall to Earth during the first 24 hours. Explosions high in the air would create smaller radioactive particles, which would not have any real effect on humans until many months or years later, if at all. 2. What would happen in an enemy attack? If the US should be attacked, the people who happen to be close to a nuclear explosion in the area of heavy destruction probably would be killed or seriously injured by the blast, or by the heat of the nuclear fireball. PG-11 people a few miles away in the fringe area of the explosion would be endangered by the blast and heat, and by fires that the explosion might start. However, it is likely that most of the people in the fringe area would survive these hazards. People who were outside the fringe area would not be affected by the blast, heat, or fire. Department of Defense studies show that in any nuclear attack an enemy might launch against us, tens of millions of Americans would be outside the fringe areas. To them and to people in the fringe areas who survived the blast, heat, and fire, radioactive fallout would be the main danger. Protective measures against this danger can be taken. What is fallout? When a nuclear weapon explodes near the ground, great quantities of pulverized earth and other debris are sucked up into the nuclear cloud. There the radioactive gases produced by the explosion condense on and into this debris, producing radioactive fallout particles. Within a short time, these particles fall back to Earth, the larger ones first, the smaller ones later. On the way down, and after they reach the ground, the radioactive particles give off invisible gamma rays like X-rays, too much of which can kill or injure people. These particles give off most of their radiation quickly, therefore the first few hours or days after an attack would be the most dangerous period. PG-12. In dangerously affected areas the particles themselves would look like grains of salt or sand, but the rays they would give off could not be seen, tasted, smelled, or felt. Special instruments would be required to detect the rays and measure their intensity. Fallout would be widespread. The distribution of fallout particles after a nuclear attack would depend on wind currents, weather conditions, and other factors. There is no way of predicting in advance what areas of the country would be affected by fallout, or how soon the particles would fall back to Earth at a particular location. Some communities might get a heavy accumulation of fallout, while others even in the same general area might get little or none. No area in the US could be sure of not getting fallout, and it is probable that some fallout particles would be deposited on most of the country. Areas close to a nuclear explosion might receive fallout within 15 to 30 minutes. It might take 5 to 10 hours or more for the particles to drip down on a community 100 or 200 miles away. Generally, the first 24 hours after fallout began to settle would be the most dangerous period to a community's residents. The heavier particles falling during that time would still be highly radioactive and give off strong rays. The lighter particles falling later would have lost much of their radiation high in the atmosphere. PG-13 fallout causes radiation sickness. The invisible gamma rays given off by fallout particles can cause radiation sickness, that is, illness caused by physical and chemical changes in the cells of the body. If a person receives a large dose of radiation, he will die. But if he receives only a small or medium dose, his body will repair itself and he will get well. The same dose received over a short period of time is more damaging than if it is received over a longer period. Usually, the effects of a given dose of radiation are more severe in very young and very old persons, and those not in good health. No special clothing can protect people against gamma radiation, and no special drugs or chemicals can prevent large doses of radiation from causing damage to the cells of the body. However, antibiotics and other medicines are helpful in treating infections that sometimes follow excessive exposure to radiation, which weakens the body's ability to fight infections. Almost all of the radiation that people would absorb from fallout particles would come from particles outside their own bodies. Only simple precautions would be necessary to avoid swallowing the particles, and because of their size, like grains of sand, it would be practically impossible to inhale them. People exposed to fallout radiation do not become radioactive and thereby dangerous to others. Other people. Radiation sickness is not contagious or infectious, and one person cannot catch it from another person. Protection is possible. People can protect themselves against fallout radiation, and have a good chance of surviving it, by staying inside a fallout shelter. In most cases, the fallout radiation level outside the shelter would decrease rapidly enough to permit people to leave the shelter within a few days. Even in communities that received heavy accumulations of fallout particles, people soon might be able to leave shelter for a few minutes or a few hours at a time in order to perform emergency tasks. In most places, it is unlikely that full-time shelter occupancy would be required for more than a week or two. The farther away you are from the fallout particles outside, the less radiation you will receive. Also, the building materials, concrete, brick, lumber, etc., that are between you and the fallout particles serve to absorb many of the gamma rays and keep them from reaching you. A fallout shelter, therefore, does not need to be a special type of building or an underground bunker. It can be any space, provided the walls and roof are thick or heavy enough to absorb many of the rays given off by the fallout particles outside, and thus keep dangerous amounts of radiation from reaching the people inside the structure. A shelter can be the basement or inner corridor of any large building, the basement of a private home, a subway or tunnel, or even a backyard trench with some kind of shielding material, heavy lumber, earth, bricks, etc., serving as a roof. In addition to protecting people from fallout radiation, most fallout shelters also would provide some limited protection against the blast and heat effects of nuclear explosions that were not close by. Chapter 4, pages 23 to 32, discusses the various types of fallout shelters that people can use to protect themselves in case of nuclear attack. Food and water would be available and usable. From many studies, the federal government has determined that enough food and water would be available after an attack to sustain our surviving citizens. However, temporary food, food shortages might occur in some areas, until food was shipped there from other areas. Most of the nation's remaining food supplies would be usable after an attack. Since radiation passing through food does not contaminate it, the only danger would be the actual swallowing of fallout particles that happen to be on the food itself, or on the can or package containing the food, and these could be wiped or washed off. Reaping, threshing, canning and other processing would prevent any dangerous quantities of fallout particles from getting into processed foods. If necessary to further protect the population, special precautions would be taken by food processors. Water systems might be affected somewhat by radioactive fallout, but the risk would be small, especially if a few simple precautions were taken. Water stored in covered containers and water in covered wells would not be contaminated after an attack, because the fallout particles could not get into the water. Even if the containers were not covered, such as buckets or bathtubs filled with emergency supplies of water, as long as they were indoors it is highly unlikely that fallout particles would get into them. Practically all of the particles that dropped into open reservoirs, lakes, and streams, or into open containers or wells, would settle to the bottom. Any that didn't would be removed when the water was filtered before being pumped to consumers. A small amount of radioactive material might dissolve in the water, but at most this would be of concern for only a few weeks. PG 16. Milk contamination from fallout is not expected to be a serious problem after an attack. If cows graze uncontaminated pasture and swallow fallout particles that contain some radioactive elements, their milk might be harmful to the thyroid glands of infants and small children. Therefore, if possible, they should be given canned or powdered milk for a few weeks if authorities say the regular milk supply is contaminated by radioactive elements. In summary, the danger of people receiving harmful doses of fallout radiation through food, water, or milk is very small. People suffering from extreme hunger or thirst should not be denied these necessities after an attack, even if the only available supplies might contain fallout particles or other radioactive substances. PG 17. If an attack actually occurs, it is almost certain that incoming enemy planes and missiles would be detected by our networks of warning stations in time for citizens to get into shelters or at least take cover. This warning time might be as little as 5 to 15 minutes in some locations. How you received warning of an attack would depend on where you happen to be at that time. You might hear the warning given on radio or television. Tactical warning of a nuclear attack on the United States would be received by our highest officials a few minutes after missiles or other nuclear weapons had been launched against our country. Radar, satellites, and other sophisticated means of detection would begin to feed information into our military warning systems almost at once. This raw information would have to be evaluated, and top-level decisions would have to be made. Then attack warnings would have to be transmitted down to communities all over America. Tactical warning, attack warning, of an out-of-the-blue, Pearl Harbor-type attack would be less likely to be received by the average American than would an attack warning given after recognized strategic warning. However, the short time, only 15 to 40 minutes, that would elapse between missile launchings and the resultant first explosions on targets in the United States would make it difficult for even an excellent warning system to alert the majority of Americans in time for them to reach the best available nearby shelter. Strengths and weaknesses of the present official warning system are summarized in the following two sections. Then the life-saving warnings that the first nuclear explosions would give, especially to informed people, are described. Official warning system. L warning system. The U.S. official warning system is designed to give civilians timely warning by means of siren signals and radio and television announcements. The National Warning System, NWAS, is a wireline network which is to provide attack information to official warning points nationwide. NWAS is not protected against electromagnetic pulse, EMP, effects from nuclear explosions. When the information is received at warning points by the officials who are responsible, they will sound local sirens and initiate radio and TV emergency broadcasts, if power has not failed. Officials at NWAS warning points include many local civil defense directors. NWAS receives information from our constantly improving military warning and communication systems.
This is a test of the emergency alert system. This is only a test. The message you are hearing is part of a nationwide live code test of emergency alert system capabilities. This test message has been initiated by National Alert and Warning Authorities in coordination with emergency alert system participants, including broadcast, cable, satellite, and wireline participants in your area. Had this been an actual emergency, the attention signal you just heard would have been followed by emergency information, news, or instructions. This is only a test. We now return you to regular programming.
I think the Amber Alert is also even better because if I'm out and driving around, I'm not going to see that on the TV. That's on the TV. I'm going to have my cell phone with me, though, and the Amber Alert is more immediate for people that are not near a TV.
It is possible but extremely unlikely that your first warning of an enemy attack might be the flash of a nuclear explosion in the sky some distance away. Or there might be a flash after warning had been given, possibly while you were on your way to shelter. Take cover instantly. If there should be a nuclear flash, especially if you are outdoors and feel warmth at the same time, take cover instantly in the best place you can find. By getting inside or under something within a few seconds, you might avoid being seriously burned by the heat or injured by the blast wave of the nuclear explosion. If the explosion were some distance away, you might have 5 to 15 seconds before being seriously injured by the heat, and perhaps 30 to 60 seconds before the blast wave arrived. Getting under cover within these time limits might save your life or avoid serious injury. Also, to avoid injuring your eyes, Never look at the flash of an explosion or the nuclear fireball. Where to take cover? You could take cover in any kind of a building, a storm cellar or fruit cellar, a subway station or tunnel, or even in a ditch or culvert alongside the road, a highway underpass, a storm sewer, a cave, or outcropping of rock, a pile of heavy materials, a trench, or other excavation. Even getting under a parked automobile, bus, or train, or a heavy piece of furniture, would protect you to some extent. If no cover is available, simply lie down on the ground and curl up. The important thing is to avoid being burned by the heat, thrown about by the blast, or struck by flying objects. Best position after taking cover. After taking cover, you should lie on your side in a curled up position, and cover your head with your arms and hands. This would give you move to a fallout shelter later. If you protected yourself against the blast and heat waves by instantly taking cover, you could get protection from the radioactive fallout, which would arrive later, by moving to a fallout shelter. PG 23. Some radiation protection is provided by the existing, standard walls and ceiling of a basement. But if they are not thick or dense enough, other shielding material will have to be added. Concrete, bricks, earth and sand are some of the materials that are dense or heavy enough to provide fallout protection. For comparative purposes, 4 inches of concrete would provide the same shielding density as 5 to 6 inches of bricks. 6 inches of sand or gravel may be packed into bags, cartons, boxes. 7 inches or earth or other containers for easier handling. 8 inches of hollow concrete blocks, 6 inches if filled with sand. 10 inches of water. 14 inches of books or magazines. 18 inches of wood. PG 26 How to prepare a home shelter. If there is no public fallout shelter near your home, or if you would prefer to use a family-type shelter in a time of attack, you should prepare a home fallout. Civil Defense, Army Publications Center, 2800 Eastern Boulevard, Middle River, Baltimore, Maryland, 21220. This is a snack bar built of bricks or concrete blocks, set in mortar, in the best corner of your basement, the corner that is most below ground level. It can be converted quickly into a fallout shelter by lowering a strong, hinged false ceiling so that it rests on the snack bar. When the false ceiling is lowered into place in a time of emergency, the hollow sections of it can be filled with bricks or concrete blocks. These can be stored conveniently nearby, or can be used as room dividers or recreation room furniture, see bench in sketch. PG 31 Pre-planned tilt-up storage unit Plan A. In a time of emergency, the storage unit can be tilted so that the bottom of it rests on a wall of bricks or concrete blocks that you have stored nearby. PG 32. Other bricks or blocks should then be placed in the When to leave shelter. You should not come out of shelter until you are told by authorities that it is safe to do so. Special instruments are needed to detect fallout radiation and to measure its intensity. Unless you have these instruments, you will have to depend on your local government to tell you when to leave shelter. This information probably would be given on the radio, which is one reason why you should keep on hand a battery-powered radio that works in your shelter area. If you came out of shelter too soon, while the fallout particles outside were still highly radioactive, you might receive enough radiation to make you sick or even kill you. Remember that fallout particles can be seen, but the rays they give off cannot be seen. If you see unusual quantities of gritty particles outside, on window ledges, sidewalks, cars, etc., after an attack, you should assume that they are fallout particles, and therefore stay inside your shelter until you are told it is safe to come out. Radiation sickness. Radiation sickness is caused by the invisible rays given off by particles of radioactive fallout. If a person has received a large dose of radiation in a short period of time, generally, less than a week, he will become seriously ill and probably will die. But if he has received only a small or medium dose, his body will repair itself and he will get well. No special clothing can protect a person from gamma radiation, and no special medicines can protect him or cure him of radiation sickness. Symptoms of radiation sickness may not be noticed for several days. The early symptoms are lack of appetite, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, weakness and headache. Later, the patient may have sore mouth, loss of hair, bleeding gums, bleeding under the skin, and diarrhea. But these same symptoms can be caused by other diseases, and not everyone who has radiation sickness shows all these symptoms, or shows them all at once. PG 67 If the patient has headache or general discomfort, give H. If the patient has headache or general discomfort, give him 1 or 2 aspirin tablets every 3 or 4 hours, half a tablet, for a child under 12. If he is nauseous, give him motion sickness tablets, if available. If his mouth is sore or his gums are bleeding, have him use a mouthwash made up of a half teaspoonful of salt to 1 quart of water. If there is vomiting or diarrhea, he should drink slowly several glasses each day of a salt and soda solution, 1 teaspoonful of salt and 1/2 teaspoonful of baking soda to 1 quart of cool water, plus bouillon or fruit juices. If available, a mixture of kaolin and pectin should be given for diarrhea. Whatever his symptoms, the patient should be kept lying down, comfortably warm, and resting. Remember that radiation sickness is not contagious or infectious, and one person cannot catch it from another person. In a home fallout shelter, however, you and your family would be largely on your own. You would have to take care of yourselves, solve your own problems, make your own living arrangements, subsist on the supplies you had previously stocked, and find out for yourself, probably by listening to the radio, when it was safe to leave shelter. In this situation, one of your most important tasks would be to manage your water and food supplies, and maintain sanitation. The following guidance is intended to help you do this. Care and use of water supplies. The average person in a shelter would need at least 1 quart of water or other liquids per day to drink, but more would be useful, to allow some for washing, etc. Therefore a rationing plan might be required in your home shelter, so as to make your available liquids last for 14 days. Many communities may continue to have potable water available, and families could relax their rationing plans. In addition to water stored in containers, there is usually other water available in most homes that is drinkable, such as water and other liquids normally found in the kitchen, including ice cubes, milk, soft PG-47 drinks, and fruit and vegetable juices. Water, 20 to 60 gallons, in the hot water tank. Water in the flush tanks, not the bowls, of home toilets. Water in the pipes of your home plumbing system. In a time of nuclear attack, local authorities may instruct householders to turn off the main water valves in their homes to avoid having water drain away in case of a break and loss of pressure in the water mains. With the main valve in your house closed, all the pipes in the house would still be full of water. To use this water, turn on the faucet that is located at the highest point in your house, to let air into the system, and then draw water, as needed, from the faucet that is located at the lowest point in your house. In a home shelter, occupants should drink first the water they know is uncontaminated, such as that mentioned above. Of course, if local authorities tell you the regular water is drinkable, it should be used. If necessary, suspicious water such as cloudy water from regular faucets or perhaps some muddy water from a nearby stream or pond can be used after it has been purified. This is how to purify it. 1. Strain the water through a paper towel or several thicknesses of clean cloth, to remove dirt and fallout particles, if any. Or else let the water settle in a container for 24 hours, by which time any solid particles would have sunk to the bottom. A handful of clay soil in each gallon of water would help this settling process. 2. After the solid particles have been removed, boil the water if possible for 3 to 5 minutes, or add a water purifying agent to it. This could be either A. Water purifying tablets, available at drugstores, or B. 2% tincture of iodine, or C. Liquid chlorine household PG-48 bleach, provided the label says that.
Yeah. Man.
That it contains hypochlorite as its only active ingredient. For each gallon of water, use 4 water purifying tablets, or 12 drops of tincture of iodine, or 8 drops of liquid chlorine bleach. If the water is cloudy, these amounts should be doubled. There would not be much danger of drinking radioactive particles in water, as they would sink quickly to the bottom of the container or stream. Very few would dissolve in the water. Although open reservoirs might contain some radioactive iodine in the first few days after an attack, this danger is considered minor except to very young children. Care and use of food supplies. Food also should be rationed carefully in a home shelter, to make it last for at least a 2-week period of shelter occupancy. Usually, half the normal intake would be adequate, except for growing children or pregnant women. Care and use of food supplies. Food also should be rationed carefully in a home shelter, to make it last for at least a 2-week period of shelter occupancy. Usually, half the normal intake would be adequate, except for growing children or pregnant women. In a shelter, it is especially important to be sanitary in the storing, handling, and eating of food, so as to avoid digestive upsets or other more serious illness, and to avoid attracting vermin. Be sure to keep all food in covered containers. Keep Keep cooking and eating utensils clean. Keep all garbage in a closed container, or dispose of it outside the home when it is safe to go outside. If possible, bury it. Avoid letting garbage or trash accumulate inside the shelter, both for fire and sanitation reasons. Emergency toilet facilities. In many home shelters, people would have to use emergency toilets until it was safe to leave shelter for brief periods of time. An emergency toilet, consisting of a watertight container with a snug fitting cover, would be necessary. It could be a garbage container, or a pail or bucket. If the container is small, a larger container, also with a cover, should be PG-49 available to empty the contents into for later disposal. If possible, Both containers should be lined with plastic bags. This emergency toilet could be fitted with some kind of seat, especially for children or elderly persons. Or it may be possible to remove the seat from a wooden chair, cut a hole in it, and place the container underneath. For privacy, the toilet could be screened from view. Every time someone uses the toilet, he should pour or sprinkle into it a small amount of regular household disinfectant, such as creosol or chlorine bleach, to keep down odors and germs. After each use, the lid should be put back on. When the toilet container needs to be emptied, and outside radiation levels permit, the contents should be buried outside in a hole 1 or 2 feet deep. This would prevent the spread of disease by rats and insects. If the regular toilets inside the home or the sewer lines are not usable for any reason, an outside toilet should be built when it is safe to do so. If anyone has been outside and fallout particles have collected on his shoes or clothing, they should be brushed off before he enters the shelter area again. Preventing and treating shock. Being in shock means that a person's circulatory system is not working properly, and not enough blood is getting to the vital centers of his brain and spinal cord. These are the symptoms of shock. The patient's pulse is weak or rapid, or he may have no pulse that you can find. His skin may be pale or blue, cold, or moist. His breathing may be shallow or irregular. He may have chills. He may be thirsty. He may get sick at his stomach and vomit. A person can be in shock whether he is conscious or unconscious. Important, all seriously injured persons should be treated for shock, even though they appear normal and alert. Shock may cause death if not treated promptly, even though the injuries which brought on shock might not be serious enough to cause death. In fact, persons may go into shock without having any physical injuries. Here is how to treat any person who may be in shock. 1. Keep him lying do. Keep him lying down and keep him from chilling, but do not apply a hot water bottle or other heat to his body. Also, loosen his clothing. 2. Keep his head a little lower than his legs and hips. But if he has a head or chest injury, or has difficulty in breathing, keep his head and shoulders slightly higher than the rest of his body. PG 63.3. Encourage him to drink fluids if he is conscious and not nauseated, and if he does not have abdominal injuries. Every 15 minutes give him a half glass of the solution until he no longer wants it. 1 teaspoonful of salt and a half teaspoonful of baking soda to 1 quart of water. 4. Do not give him alcohol. Improvising fallout protection. If an enemy attack should occur when you are at home, and you have made no advanced shelter preparations, you still might